You can homeschool more than one child, even if they're different ages. They don't have to be twins,
Mm.
and they have totally different interests. To be following two totally separate children, and they never stop pestering each other.
Oh no! In Montessori, having kids of different ages isn't a problem.
No,
In
it isn't.
fact, multi-urge learning is what Montessori was built on.
Exactly. Multi-age learning is essentially a Montessori concept. And I think in a lot of ways, even though the one-room schoolhouse came far, far before Maria Montessori,
Sure.
it is a concept that really Montessorians leaned into and totally embraced. And that came right out of Maria Montessori's legacy, her tradition.
That's right. So today we're starting a three-part series on how to homeschool with multiples. We actually had this question a lot. Some of you
By multiples, we don't mean like twins or triplets. We mean like
more
multiple
than
children.
one,
Yeah,
yeah, more than one kiddo in the house that you're homeschooling.
that's
And
right.
actually, we wanted to address this because we just spent a week in Texas, where we're from originally. And part of that time, we were at a really nice homeschool conference.
Oh,
We met
yeah.
hundreds of parents from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, including some members. Thank you for stopping by. It was really great to see you. And one of the questions that they asked, one of the most frequent questions that we received was, what do I do if I have kids at different ages? Do I have to buy multiple curriculums? Do I have to split them up? There's just lots and lots of questions about this. And we get this question a lot in our own community. And I know we've got a nice group out there. Hello, welcome. If you're enjoying our show, please hit the thumbs up. It really helps us. And be sure to ask any questions you want in the chat. If you have questions about having homeschooling more than one, because we know that this is a common question. And as you said, it's actually, or as we said, it's not really a problem if you have the right mindset, and Montessori is the right mindset.
Yes, we had so many parents come to us and they were like, well, I'm looking for curriculum, but I've got a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old, or I've got a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old,
Yes.
and so I think that when homeschooling parents, like even though like it is common to have more than one child, it's just the way we have structured the traditional school system that we have, at least school system that we have here in the United States and in many places worldwide. We think that children need to have a lesson per subject per day, or that you have to at least teach each specific age child differently from the next age child. Like your child's born between, September and May of this year, then they can be taught one way. And if your child is like a month older, then they need to be taught a different way, or they should be on a more advanced level, or, something like that. And it's this false idea.
Yeah, where does it come from?
Well, I mean, I think my gut says that it comes from the idea that we're constantly wanting to mold children into a very specific type of being
Oh, yeah.
with very, very specific skills. And so I don't know, when you think about the kind of, I don't know, think about like building a house or something. You're
Yeah,
like, we live in a house that is like one of the little boxes that was made famous in that song, Little Boxes. And all of the houses look the same, right? Like
that's right.
they're all
The housing development.
It's a house, right? A housing development, right? They all look the same. They're only in our neighborhood in specific. I know that there are only like 2 models, like 2 floor plans, and so you can walk into any house in our neighborhood, and there are 80,000 people who live here in our neighborhood,
Yeah.
in San Francisco, and like you'll
Almost invariably,
like
it'll be either
you'll
A or
know,
B.
yeah, it's going to be like the bathrooms on this side or the bathrooms on that side,
That's right.
or
This one
like
has the atrium in the middle. This one has it in the front.
yes, one's a little smaller, one's a little bit bigger, but essentially, like it's the same floor plan. It's just reduplicated. And how did this developer do that? They created a workable plan and was able to just like start from the beginning and like have a really simple mapped out system, you know, where the houses would be built. And it was so sequential so that like they just built this whole neighborhood in a very, very short amount of time.
Yeah.
Right. And we have the same mindset in the school system, like
Yeah.
that children can be built in this way, and that if you do these things, then you will end up with a good hard worker, you know,
Yeah.
as an end result, as an adult. You know, what do we even as teachers tell each other? We worked in the public school system. We were told constantly, we're creating the future citizens of America. We want to create good, hardworking people, right?
Sure.
And so I think our school system like was developed with this mindset.
Yeah, it was a mishmash of ideals, right? Like you had, it does come out of, and we won't get too far into like the history of education because that would be probably a little arcane for our power
I mean,
hour,
feel
although
free. I think people are interested. Give them the Reader's Digest version.
I mean, what you've hit on the main point. You know, there's a balance between um, I guess it's what is politics is the art of the possible, right? So in a sense, that's also what we have in our educational system now. I think it's gotten worse as other factors have joined in, but essentially, it was how can you deliver the most to the with the least amount of cost.
Right.
That's kind of a big part of it. So the reason that your example about the Dolger
Mm.
houses, which is what they
They're
call
cheap too, right? It was like a cheap
yeah,
production
or
method.
any kind of the Levittown that was
I mean,
invented after World War II, right?
yeah.
Or any mass product, the Model T, you could get any color as long as it was black, right?
Right.
That
And
was
cars do still do this today, right? We don't have limitless options with
yeah. So it's mass
features.
production. It was developed in the 20th century, and it became such an important component of thinking that they developed all kinds of psychology and social psychology around it
Hmm.
in the early 20th century, and it really influenced so much. And so that's why you see now you don't see it in the way, but forever you saw what did an office look like? It looked like rows of
Yeah.
desks, right? And that's because it was easy to monitor, easy to regiment, easy to develop. And they've kind of tried to break a little bit away from that, but at the end of the day, it's not really about what's good for the worker, or in this case, the child. It's about what's most expedient. And so, if you want to educate a large and diverse population,
Hmm.
but you don't want to spend really any money on it, the best way to do it is to try and come up with the most common denominator.
The
And that
most
is,
efficient way to get
yeah,
children from point A, which would be traditionally like
first grade
first
or
grade,
kindergarten.
kindergarten,
Yeah.
all the way to the graduation point.
Yeah. So, how do you prepare them for high school, graduation, college, or career, right?
Right.
And most basic, the simplest way to do this is to group them by age, right? You say, here's
Mhm.
the starting point and here's the end point of a year. And it's not the calendar
Right.
year,
You know,
it's a year based on the school year.
you're exactly right. Because like if you were to mix the age group, you're introducing a lot more variables in the,
Totally. It's just
and
much, much harder.
it becomes more
Because in
experimental
general, and
and
we're gonna talk about this in just a second, but
yeah.
in general, a 5-year-old, or let's say five is kind of a bad example, but let's say a 7-year-old has more in common with other 7-year-olds than they do with a 4-year-old
That's
in
true.
general, right?
Yes.
So, or with a 10-year-old. So if you are going to try and figure out how to group people together in general, because of planes of development,
Hmm.
a 7-year-old is more like other 7-year-olds than not. However, a child is not a widget. A human is not a widget. And so even there are real serious limitations very, very quickly when you start to group people together by age. Because your chronological age is not necessarily your developmental readiness. It's a process that unfolds over time. Some people, we used to call them late bloomers, right? And then some who are really advanced and they get to a certain stage of development. They're reading really early, for example.
Right.
It doesn't mean that they're brilliant in all ways or they're delayed in all ways. It just means that every human is different.
Yep.
But when you group them all together into a grade, you are unable to address those variances. You're forced to treat everybody the same to
Hmm.
some degree, obviously not quite reality. And that's where you start to get to this idea where parents,
But ideally, we'll.
yeah, but ideally, but this is where you start to hear people complain about teaching to the middle.
Hmm.
And I would say, having studied and worked in education for my entire life, my entire professional life, more or less, I would say that that the way we do education doesn't work for anybody, but some people are better at surviving it. right? That's the way that we generally do mainstream education. And in fact, when they look at who succeeds in school, it's people who come from often wealthier families because they have resources to supplement.
Hmm.
They teach their children how to do school, like how to go along and follow the rules and fly under the radar, or take advantage of the system to get ahead.
Yep.
And the people who struggle the most, the kids who struggle the most, are those who don't necessarily have the family or other resources to support that. What
Hmm.
does that tell you? It tells you it's not about academics. It tells you it's not about intelligence. It tells you it's not about creativity. It tells you that it's about a system that you can master. You can master the system to succeed better or worse. And grades, like age-based grades,
I would say that
are a part of that.
neurotypical children tend to succeed in this system
Yes.
more than neurodiverse
Well, that's
children,
because like
as an
whoever fits
exception to.
closest to the middle, like
Mhm.
whatever the stamp is, right? Like they've stamped out this is what fourth grade student looks like. The closer you fit, or the closer you can pretend to fit into that mold, the better the more successful you'll be. I mean, that's just what the research tells us, and I think all of us have experienced that to some degree or another. What's interesting, and the reason kind of this kind of preamble is important, is that we as a people have gotten so used to this that we assume that it's the way it should be,
Mhm.
right? We think that grade levels are so that way because it's the right way,
Right.
not because it's the most expedient way. We forgive all of the problems that we and many of us experienced in traditional schooling. We just forgive that because the grass is always greener, because
Or
hindsight,
maybe we
rose
succeeded in
colored
the
glasses.
end,
Yeah, because we
and
made it through. And hey, if I made it, you can too. You're just being lazy or something like
mhm.
that. And maybe that's the case, but maybe it's also that, like, despite the odds, you kind of made it through. And what a missed opportunity anyway to spend 18 years in a system that really didn't care much about you. I
As a
mean, as a
person,
person,
yeah.
now the teachers, I'll say they love you.
Care. They care. Yeah, they
And
do.
most administrators just will care too. The problem is the system.
Yep.
The system grinds everything down, and it makes it really, really hard, maybe impossible, for people to rise above it because it's just so gigantic and so oppressive. That's where homeschooling can make a difference. Not right for everybody. We would say actually homeschooling is anybody can do it. We know that there are various circumstances in your life. If you can homeschool, though, if you're in the position to do it, this is a reason you might, because you're able to meet to your child's specific needs. And you can do that even if you have more than one. In fact, because of what Montessori teaches us, it's actually even better in some ways if you have multiple kids learning together at different ages.
That's
It's
right.
magic.
It really is. I think that because so many of us grew up in the factory model approach to education, even if we recognize in our hearts that, like, this is not what we want for our children, like the parts that did not serve us, we're still in a culture where this is the norm,
Yeah.
and where our children as homeschoolers, we go out in the world and we're constantly hit with, strangers, nice strangers usually coming up, and they're like, "What grade are you in? Well, how old are you? What is your favorite subject? What are you learning about this year?" And so these are all like leading questions that go right back to
That's
that
woven
traditional
into
model.
our culture
Yes.
so deeply that it's hard to extricate ourselves from it.
Yes. So then here we have a homeschooler, let's say that homeschooler who has like a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old and maybe a 7-year-old. Oh no, they say, well, how am I going to do this? Because now I've got a preschooler, I've got a preschooler, a kindergartner, and a second grader. How can I teach all three things when it takes 3 teachers at school with those children in completely different classrooms to teach those kids in like an all-day program? Or at least, let's say for the preschool, maybe it's a half-day program. So you've got like two full-day programs
Right.
and a half-day program. And how can one person do all of that, right? So this is so common. And I think that it's the reason that when we were at that conference, we often were hit by excited homeschoolers, but also a little bit anxious homeschoolers,
Weary,
especially
I've been
especially if
wary
they were
of
new.
yeah, the idea that you could do it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's understandable. I mean,
Yeah.
the truth is you won't be able to teach to the level of an expert in every domain unless you're some sort of I don't know, like a super genius or something. Like you probably don't know all the works of Shakespeare and all the ins and outs of algebra plus all of the physics, and like it's just you're not going to know all of that. And that's sort of the model, especially in high school, where I think it becomes more obvious that you have these specializations, which is older than most of the kids that we work with, in our programs. But parents are thinking about that, like, well, what comes next? I mean, that's because the high schools are modeled after college. And so you have a specialist in English and a specialist in physics and a specialist just like you do in universities. But the fact is that you don't actually need that. That being a domain expert is good, but it doesn't actually make you a good teacher.
Okay, that's true, but I want to stop you. I want to
Okay.
bring us back to the age group that we're talking about. We've got a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-year-old.
Okay.
This homeschool parent, maybe they're great at Shakespeare, maybe they're not. What they're at least thinking is, I've got 2 kids who are technically in school, right? The kindergartner and the 2nd grader. And I've got 1 kid who's 3, and I know I should be teaching them too. But what usually happens with this kind of family dynamic is
Mm.
we'll say, like, you know what? I know I should be teaching the 3-year-old, but I'm not gonna, right? Like, I could go out and buy a curriculum, but nah, like, it's just too much, right? So we're gonna like take that kid off our plate and just say, we'll call it a day with some play dates, and we'll just read to them, okay? Which is, I'm not saying that's not fine, but that often is what happens. And then we'll say, okay, now we've got the 5-year-old and the 7-year-old. What do I have to do at the very least? At the very least, I got to teach the 5-year-old to read and keep the 7-year-old's reading skills going. That 7-year-old really needs to learn how to write by this age. Our brains say the 5-year-old needs to be learning how to write,
Yeah.
and they both need to have math. And so I've got 3 lessons for the 5-year-old and 3 lessons for the 7-year-old that I'm thinking in my head I need to cover in one day.
That's right.
Okay, and that leaves no room for geography, life science, physical science, all humankind,
Cultural studies,
geography,
how
like
they call it, or
the arts, right? And so our typical homeschool parent is thinking, okay, like, if I'm going to do this, I can't conceive of like teaching all of the subjects to all of my kids, even if there's just like 2 that I'm focused on. It's a lot of subjects. So I'm just going to pick and choose. And the ones that I'm going to pick and choose for curriculum are going to be reading, writing, and math, right? Because those seem like the essentials, right?
Mhm.
But what we're going to tell you is that you don't have to take that approach at all. You don't have to just focus on reading, writing, and math. You can have all of the subjects, but the key is to embrace this multi-age learning model and throw out the factory model of education. And
Yep.
it's a big ask for
It is.
parents.
Yeah. I mean, all of that stuff we just talked about, the like why schools look the way they do, the way it's woven to our language, what we're asking you to do if you want to embrace this multi-age approach or homeschooling more generally, Montessori homeschooling in particular, is to delete a lot of assumptions and habits that might be really comfortable to you.
That's right, to de-school
You're
yourself
gonna
of
right.
those
You have to
ideas.
take that concept out of your mind and say, I want to educate my children. My goal is for them to be educated people, literate people, people who can go out and be creative and successful and happy, productive in the world. Uh, and that's my goal. My goal is not to replicate the traditional approach in my house.
Right.
Like you can do that if you want to try. It's not very fun. It's not the best method, but it might make you feel comfortable because it's like a warm blanket. It's familiar. Asking you to sort of say, throw that off and leap is hard, but there is plenty of research to back this method up.
Mhm.
It's not just sort of like a fly by night idea. The methods that Montessori discovered and innovated over 100 years ago have been infused and then watered down in our educational system. And so basically, what we're asking you to do is go to the source. right? So don't think of it as like I have to delete all of the stuff that I thought. We're saying like, actually, you've got a beautiful garden. It's just overgrown with weeds. You just gotta get those weeds out there and it will come back to life. Because the things that Montessori and other educational theorists like Dewey and so forth discovered early on in the 20th century greatly influenced it. They've just been watered down in the pursuit of mass um, do the most for the least
That's
instead of
right.
do the most for, with and not worry about the cost, not worry
Yeah.
about
It's that
the
big business mindset
yeah,
that
like
we're
if we
applying.
really think that children are the future, then what a price tag would be too high. Like it should be the sky's the limit, and it's not. It should tell you something about your priorities, right? There's something about the treasure in the heart being right as it goes. Where your treasure, your heart will be found. So where do we put our treasure currently? We are asking you to put that you treasure your children and that you can give them the very best by going to the source, which is what Montessori created. So we found three things, right? No, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we wanted to highlight three things in particular from Montessori that you will find kind of woven in other contemporary systems that but have been lost, watered down, so forth. And so this would be like we're weeding out the garden. We're gonna see the beautiful, pristine beauty below because we're going to the source. Here's the head fountain. Okay, so three things from Montessori. Number one is planes of development. What are the planes of development?
I love you so much.
Well, I could talk more, but I was trying to, not
Okay.
dominate.
Um, all right. The planes of development. Maria Montessori. Okay, this is not how I was going to lead into this. So, like, you just lead in.
Well, the planes of development is the idea that the child will develop as the child develops into adulthood and beyond. There are periods of development where sensitivities to certain kinds of order or certain kinds of concepts will emerge. And so you can more or less see relative similarities, let's say, for a child who's in the second half of the first plane of development, ages 3 to 6, right? So a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old or a 5.5-year-old are in the same plane of development. The 5.5-year-old is exiting it, the 3-year-old is entering it, that second half of the first plane. And so they have commonalities like a sensitivity to sensorial learning, a need for practical life, a growing awareness of language and math, which will emerge around age 4. This kind of commonality is how we can then understand that a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old really can work together. It is kind of the underpinning of why we might group people together by age, because in general, a 10-year-old is more like other 10-year-olds than they are like a 15-year-old, of course. Part of that is explainable because of the idea of the planes of development, but it's not so fine that you can say it's only going to be these 9 to 10-year-olds. You're looking for something broader. And so Montessori, by identifying that there are planes of development, really gives us a chance to explore and group kids together so that their actual natural strengths, their sensitivities can emerge and they can begin to work together.
Okay. Thank you for explaining. Um, Montessori decided to group children by these planes of development when she created the classrooms. And I think that she started with that very original classroom with children who were ages 2 to 6, 2.5, two and
Mm-hmm.
a half to 6, just because that was the grouping of
Mm-hmm.
children that she was given to work with. But as she watched their development, she noticed a big shift happening just before children would go off to first grade.
Mm-hmm.
And that a lot of people don't know, like the reason that she wasn't working with 7 to 9-year-olds or 7 to 12-year-olds to begin with was because those kids were already in school. And she wasn't thinking of, no one was thinking that this little community of children in Rome that she was going to first work with, that became the Casa dei Bambini, the House of Children, was going to be a school. It
Mm-hmm.
was only later, after she had started to prove that these little children were educable, that they could learn and grow, and that they should be treated as worthy as older children, that they
Hmm.
could call it a school, right? That's really where we get the concept of like a preschool today. It also came from the idea of a kindergarten
Yep.
in Germany, but Maria Montessori was really like right in there with the creation of the first preschools. So it's traditional in Montessori, I think, partly because that was the original grouping. We started with that
Hmm.
ages 2.5, 3 to 6 year old age group. And then we kind of started to incorporate other age groups. And the original, I have my lower elementary training
Yep.
in ages 6 to 9. But in the original Montessori elementary classrooms, I believe it was from 6 to 12 as a grouping.
Hmm.
So it would be the whole second plane. And when you think about how those children kind of relate to each other, it does make sense that they would be more in sync with each other.
Yes.
However, what we noticed with our own children was that our kids were 3 years apart.
Hmm.
And so sometimes they would be in the same plane of development, and
Yep.
sometimes they weren't in the same plane of development. And what we noticed was that their interactions changed
That's right.
as one would enter another plane and the other was still in the former plane. We noticed like their interactions would change and their perspective on life was a little bit different. But we were still like embracing this whole family mindset of homeschooling,
Hmm.
so that even though our children were in these different planes, they still were able to receive a lot of the same lessons. They would just get different things out of them.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, and what I think is interesting about what you just said is that Montessori was a scientist. She went in, she had a group of kids who were of a certain age. She didn't pick that group. It was the group that existed. And through her careful observation and study, she realized that there were these developmental milestones happening. And from that grew our understanding. Now, what I love also about what you said is absolutely right. As you're in, because we hear that, that was also brought up a lot. So I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, or maybe a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. Like they are in different planes, right? One is in the first plane, one is in the second plane. That doesn't, but because we can understand the planes of development, we can individualize the same lesson to appeal. So more
Hmm.
sensorial and practical life oriented for the 3 or 4-year-old,
Hmm.
more research, creative, big work, ethical, moral dilemma kind of stuff for the older. The same topic can really work for both. Just understanding those planes of development, you, the parent, understanding the planes of development can empower um, that ability to differentiate.
Okay, so um, this is one of the crucial aspects of mixed age learning that you really need to understand pretty deeply in order to effectively teach children in different planes of development. So if you've got that 3-year-old, the 5-year-old are both in the first plane, the 7-year-old would be in the second plane.
Hmm.
And if you understand the needs, as David was talking about, of these different the different planes of development, like the characteristics and the desires and the motivations that are unique to each separate age group, then it's not going to be a problem to have them in your same classroom at home.
With the one exception, if you're trying to use a boxed curriculum, this is not going to work very well because a boxed curriculum is designed to kind of really be individualized. Not, I don't want, that's the wrong word. The boxed curriculum is really meant to be here, child A is your material, here,
Mm-hmm.
child B is your material. So it's not individualized to the learner, but it is sort of personalized to the specific human. And so if you're not taking a thematic approach, you're not going to be able to do this. So, yes, you're going to have trouble. If you set up your homeschool environment where you have your 7-year-old working through a workbook and your 4-year-old doing something else that's also kind of workbook or box curriculum driven, they aren't going to work together because your mindset is wrong. You're not actually thinking about the planes of development.
Mm-hmm.
You're sort of relying on the boxed curriculum to differentiate for you. And it's essentially replicating what you're seeing in a traditional school.
That's
So
right.
if you put a kindergartner and a third grader from a traditional school together, like they're going to have to sort of de-school their minds before they'll start to work together, because they've been regimented into that. And so if you continue to replicate that at home, you're going to get the same kinds of mixed results. So the planes of
That's
development
right.
requires you to treat those children as on a journey. And it cannot just be here's your binder and here's your binder, or you can work in the same room together. Now you're co-learning.
That's right. If you're interested in going further into talking about Montessori theory in those planes of development, consider joining our community,
Yep.
because this is the kind of stuff we talk about. And in the Montessori, the foundations of Montessori primary and the foundations of Montessori lower elementary courses, you get all the characteristics of each
Yep.
age child. So, there's just a lot to learn here that we can't share in this one little episode. But I encourage you, and if you're a member, but you have forgotten some of the characteristics of each age child, go and dip into those courses. You have access, full access as a complete or unlimited member.
Absolutely.
Okay. The second thing we want to talk about to bring into this conversation about having multiple aged children at your house is the concept of the spiral curriculum. So in Montessori, I know this is very unusual. Like the spiral curriculum is actually, it's used in many different education models.
Sure.
All right. It's even used in the traditional education system. You might remember a little bit of this, or it might be a little bit noticeable to you. It's that concept that I think I was in 7th grade by the time, my mother tells this story all the time. If you're watching, wow, I love you, Mom.
And hit the like button.
And hit the like button, right? So the story is like, by the time I entered public school in 4th grade, by the time I got to 7th, I kind of had this epiphany. It was like, it's just the same thing over and over and over. Every single year, we just learn the same thing, but like there's just only like a little hint more. And then the next year starts over, and then like it's the same thing again. Like every single year you're teaching math, like you spend the first 6 weeks reviewing the previous year, before adding any additional math. Year to year, the traditional education system does use a spiral curriculum, but guess what? We do in Montessori too, and you can use this to your advantage when you have more than one child at home. How? Well, by repeating our subject areas and lessons over time. And I'm going to make an example by showing you I'm just going to pull out one of our themes.
What we got here?
We've got giants, the concept of big things, and we've got wheel here. If you teach these lessons, here, let's say the cityscape collage is an arts lesson, your 3-year-old is going to get something different out of this lesson than your 5-year-old. I'm going to hedge a bet that your 3-year-old probably isn't great at using scissors yet. And so one of the primary things that they might be learning through this activity about making a cityscape might be cutting skills. Just learning how to hold the pair of scissors, open them and close them. Maybe they have the strength to close them but not open them. That physical interaction is going to be the purposeful part. Or maybe your 3-year-old is going to be really interested in the sensory sensation of like the gluing process. And so maybe they don't even care about the scissors at all. They're just interested in the gluing, and all you need to do is you're going to cut out all the pieces for them. They're going to take the pieces and glue them on. Okay.
Right.
And a 3-year-old, many 3-year-olds don't even care where those pieces go on the paper. They're just the act is just like, I glued it. I glued it. I glued it, right?
They're not interested in the aesthetics.
It's not even going to look like a cityscape. It's like, who cares? What we're interested in is that practical activity, right? Like the purposeful activity. We're going to learn about glue and how to do this process. We're learning about the texture of paper, properties of liquid, viscous liquid, stickiness, those sorts of things, or like how to hold scissors.
And these are all actual lessons from the practical life curriculum.
Exactly.
And there's a variety of kinds of like gluing techniques that you would learn, dot gluing, glue sticks, that you could go and reference, because and then if you wanted to then combine what you're seeing your child naturally want to do, which is apply the glue and put it down in kind of maybe a helter-skelter way, then you can combine that with the foundational lesson to sort of understand kind of the progression. So that's
So,
your 3-year-old. What about your
right.
7-year-old?
Well, let's talk about the 5-year-old
Oh, the
first.
5-year-old.
5-year-old is probably going to have better cutting skills.
Probably.
I say probably because not all kids develop this at the same
Mm-hmm.
rate. Having taught kindergarten,
Yep.
I can tell you some of them were really great with scissors, and some of them needed the whole year with lots and lots of practice before they were able to cut on a straight line.
Yeah.
And it's just because they, just little hands develop at different rates. And if you give them more practice with them when they're younger, they're more likely to get there by the time they're 5 or 6, but not all of them will. And that's okay. But a 5-year-old, they would be more interested in like the choices that are involved,
Oh, yeah.
choosing the colors. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so some 5-year-olds might decide to choose all blues or all the same size rectangle. They might be like sorting the sizes of
Because in this
rectangles.
activity, you're creating a cityscape collage,
That's
right?
right.
So
That's
you're going
right.
to take, yeah, so we have our example
Essentially.
here, right? So this is one possible outcome that it
Mhm.
could look like. And you're right. So for that 5-year-old, maybe they're still working on some of the cutting and,
Oh, definitely.
right?
Definitely. Yes.
And the different techniques, but they're started to emerge into kind of an aesthetic. This is the beginning of an aesthetic appreciation.
Hmm.
What
Yes.
what do I want it to look like?
Right. Right. And, even if they don't have a great idea at first, you'll notice like they will be transitioning from the take something and just like slap down the glue into more of a curation, right? A
Yeah.
conscious art is developing in them. Your 7-year-old, with your 7-year-old, you actually can really, they might be really interested in looking at real life cityscapes,
Hmm.
and some of them will want to replicate them
Yeah.
as they appear.
Yeah.
Those perfectionist tendencies are probably coming out a little bit. You or the extra messy tendencies. I find that with the second plane group,
Yeah.
the second plane of development group, those 6 to 12-year-olds, some of them like lean really perfectionist,
Mhm.
and some of them lean really like scattered, messy, bigger,
Yes. Yes.
never-ending project type of thing. And it kind of just depends on your child. But your 7-year-old's going to have a completely different experience with the same really simple cityscape collage activity. And so there's absolutely no reason why you can't teach these 3 children together.
Yes.
Now, in this single lesson, we're teaching children about skyscrapers. We're showing them examples of what cityscapes look like. We're teaching a little math. We're talking about like how many floors buildings can have, how
Mhm. How
tall they
tall they
are.
are. Yep.
Right. And a little bit about like city, I don't know if you call it like city architecture. What do you call
Yeah.
a city
Like
planner?
urban planning and all. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots of concepts to go in there. And your children just at these different ages are going to have different experiences, but they're still going to have an enriching experience with it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
absolutely right.
And so there's no reason that you have to say, I'm only going to give the cityscape collage activity to my 5-year-old,
That's
and
right.
but not the 7-year-old or the 3-year-old. You can teach all of these ages together. And so this is the approach that we took with our own children. It worked really, really
Yeah.
well. What we noticed, actually what I noticed when I started teaching our 3-year-old and or our 2-year-old and 5-year-old or 3-year-old and 6-year-old at home was that our youngest always wanted to be doing what the
Oh,
oldest was
yes,
doing.
for sure.
And at first, this kind of bugged me a little bit because it did, because I had this mindset, even though I came from a Montessori background, I had this mindset that like I was going to be teaching my older child these big lessons and that the little one would probably go and play with his blocks instead of sit. But what I found was like, when my 6-year-old sat down with that clipboard and was taking notes, on the lesson or interacting with whatever I was doing, the little one's behavior would just rise to the occasion. He was so proud, wanting his own clipboard and
Mhm.
pencil too, even though he wasn't writing words yet. He was just scribbling
Yep.
on the paper. there was like an empowerment. And then I was always surprised that he got so much out of the lesson. I'm
Yep.
curious, for those of you who are watching live, if you have more than one child and more than one plane of development, if you have found that as well, I would be curious to hear from you.
Yeah, we have a great question too, but I wanted to, because I think sometimes people say, well, sure, an art lesson, but what about something more serious?
Ooh,
Oh,
good
yes.
one. Okay.
So I was looking at Wheel, and so one of the activities we did in Wheel was the lunar uh, zodiac,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so there are actually large pieces that you would cut out, and then you would make a big wheel, a big work. Now, the full work has the child put all of it together like a puzzle. They have to match the picture of the dragon to the piece that says dragon. There's also the years that go around. So it starts in 2025 and it goes all the way to 2048. And so there's a numeric pattern that they can see. They can do calculations. They can figure out how old they would be when it is next, let's say, the year of the dog, which is going to be 2030. And so they can
Mm-hmm.
do some math. Not a 3-year-old, though, right? This is not something a 3-year-old do. What would a 3-year-old do? How would you modify this? How would we say to modify this kind of lesson for a 3-year-old?
Well, actually, it's inside the packet itself. Can you find the lesson?
Well, that wasn't a leading question, but you're right. So it says with your toddler, just work with, oops, that's the Ferris wheel one. Also a good one.
Also a good one. Yeah.
Do you remember offhand? Let me go.
Which one it is? It's in there. You find it. If you find it, the ages are.
Oh, here it is. Okay. Work with the animals, building the outside ring together with your toddler. Don't worry about the years. So
Yep.
the first one is you're just going to you would take the outer pieces, and what you're doing is you're familiarizing them with the animals that go with the different years within the Chinese lunars, the zodiac. For your primary child, so this would be, let's say, a 4 or 5 into 6, let your primary child assemble the wheel with you while discussing the animals. Practice saying the names together. So in this case, you're going to put the whole puzzle together. And now you're going to be associating the picture of the ox with the wedge that says ox and has the other information. And then for your oldest child, you would challenge them to research more about the origin of the Chinese zodiac calendar. Or, as I was suggesting, start to do some math problems with those years. So this is one example of where the lesson is you're introducing the idea of the Chinese zodiac. You give them this visual representation in the form of a puzzle. All 3 children can enjoy that puzzle activity, but what you do with your child will vary based on their age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great example.
So we have some good comments here before we go to our third Montessori point. Okay, so GFAM says, would it be bad or confusing approach to do some book work when you go on vacation, just so you don't lose the routine of doing work? What would be the alternative? Thank you. All right, that is a great question.
It is.
So I have a thought, but what would you say?
You have a thought, but what would I say?
Yes.
I guess I would say that
That's what I was going to say.
It's perfectly okay to play around with some worksheets.
Totally. So
Totally. I mean, that's my genuine response is like, first, I think you don't have to, your children are like, when you're on vacation, if you're traveling, you do not have to do schoolwork. All right. And we found that out in a very real way. At first, we were thinking of traveling and like we would bring homeschool stuff with us. Usually it was me who was like stuffing stuff into our vacation travel suitcases. But we decided to not do that after, an experiment.
Yep.
And what we just learned was that the experience of being on vacation, it was just much better for our kids if we leaned into the educational opportunities that were already present. So something that was better, that was more effective for us, that we implemented instead, like in lieu of doing regular work. And I do know a lot of families will bring their golden beads with them to grandma's house or whatever, and have successful experiences with them. But we just happened to not. Our children were really wanting to do other things. But what did work for us was bringing little piles of blank books for this.
Oh,
Do you remember
yes.
this?
Yeah.
So we would make them ahead of time. I would actually make them out of scrap material, like scrap materials. You know how you cut out your parts cards and you end up with funny shaped piles of paper? I know some of you are out there with little piles of paper around you right now. Or even just like
There's some note
index
cards.
cards, you know. So what I would do is I would just staple them. I would take my stapler, I would get some colored paper and make a cover for them out of construction paper.
Yep.
Cut the construction paper to size, and I wasn't a perfectionist about it. They were always a little bit off.
Yeah, because you're using scraps.
I know that bugs some people, but they were scraps. And so I didn't really bother with making them perfect in any way. But I would take the construction paper and I would do this. I would cut a shape relatively, close. Let's say my paper was this size. I would cut my construction paper like this, and then I would fold it in half around the little pages that were inside, making it like a little cover, and then I would staple it together. And we brought many of these little books of various sizes and shapes. Sometimes it's fun to cut them into different shapes. I know David did this in our last packet where he kind of made the little book a different shape. But sometimes I would make like heart-shaped books, where it's like half of a heart and you open it up and it's a little heart. You probably remember this from some of the notebooks they make for elementary kids that are available in Target and stuff, right? So sometimes like little heart books or other little shapes, sometimes teeny, teeny, tiny books that were just like a tiny little square and a few little pages inside. And we'd bring colored pencils or other art materials. And that is what we use those a lot. And we would just practice writing about our vacation. We would dictate sentences and we would write in them and they would draw. Sometimes we would write little books or jokes. And then they would read them if they were able to read at that point. So that was something that we did a lot in lieu of. And I think that for myself, I had to be okay. We leaned into like, we're year-round schooling. And so we're just going to go on vacations throughout the year. And we're just going to count it, and then like sometimes we'll unschool, right? And those times were like when we're on vacation. And during the times that we were at home, we leaned like more heavily into our regular homeschool rhythm.
Yeah, I think you're, absolutely. Much better than I would have said.
I don't know what was on your mind.
Well, just the same thing. Like, first off, like if you're only going to be gone for a short amount of time, it can be just a great educational experience to lean into it. That said, I think rhythm and routine is super essential, even especially when you're traveling, I think, with little guys, because they can get so discombobulated, right? Where's my bed? Where's my meal time? When's bath time? The story, whatever it is, like you have a routine at home of some sort. And then when you travel, it all gets thrown out the window. Like I'm not sleeping in the same room and I don't go to the bed at the same time or whatever. And I don't have my favorite blanket. And so the more that you can maintain a kind of consistent rhythm is often really helpful with kids, as you know, right? As every mother and father know. And that can include schoolwork. So I think that you can use
Mad Libs are super fun.
Yeah, so
Somebody
you can
in our community posted that the other day.
So there's nothing wrong with using workbooks. They're just tools. I think where I would say I would caution is if your entire homeschool approach is based on workbooks.
But hers is not.
Well, I know it's not. She's in our community. But that would be the caveat. Like if your entire homeschool approach is workbook based, I would say you're not really taking full advantage of what it is. But if you're using workbooks to supplement, if you're using them for fun, if you're using them, there's nothing wrong with them. They're just tools. And all tools can have a good application. And if it's like you want to maintain a homeschooling rhythm while you're traveling because it gives a sense of consistency to your family's life, which is super good, then do it. Use your Mad Lib, use the little books, use workbooks, whatever it is that works for you.
There's 100% nothing. I think we give workbooks a bad name because they can, if they are forced on children and their only source of education is workbooks, then they're really boring. Honestly, that's how our schooling was at school. I think hopefully schools are a little better about it these days. You know, it seems like
Yeah, now
by
they're on
the
the computer.
time, right, they're just doing those worksheets on the computer. Exactly. No, for real.
No, it is.
I know it's been a little while since we've been
It's
in the
just the same with
classroom, but
tests. Tests are fine. The problem is we overuse them. We expect too much out of them. We associate them with too many
yeah,
punishments or extrinsic rewards and punishments. Workbooks are the same. Like workbooks can be totally valuable. You doing flashcards can be really helpful.
totally.
There's
Yeah,
nothing wrong with that. Like we say, oh, road is bad. Road education has a place if it's helping us to kind of synthesize it, like, or not synthesize, but kind of store information. But that can't be the end of the education. Like
right.
you can put that in there, then you have to give them lots and lots of opportunity to authentically apply it.
Yeah. So let's get out of the mindset that we have to constantly be in charge of educating our children all the
Mm.
time.
Yeah.
Children educate themselves. Remember, Maria called this an auto education, you know, education that is ongoing, that is coming from within your child's inner guide.
Yeah.
And there is time and space for you to not be in charge of it for a little while, to just let them be, let them
Yeah.
enjoy the road trip and be bored and look out the window. Let them, you know, when our kids were older, at first, remember how we were taking long plane rides because we live far from family, so we were taking a lot of plane rides. And I was really trying to hold us to that, like, no tech. We're going to do everything, entertain the kids for the whole
Hmm.
plane ride, using just like, I don't know, little games that I brought or having conversations or stuff. But guess what? There's lots of anxiety that comes with a plane
Your little
ride.
ears
And
hurt when you're going
eventually,
up
yes,
and
little ears hurt.
down.
And eventually, David was like, just let them have the iPad and watch something. It's not that big of a deal. And I was like, okay. And even though I was nervous about using technology for the purpose of, you know, having a child tune
Distracting.
out, right? Honestly, like once we just kind of relaxed with things, it made it so much better as a family, you know.
Yeah.
So I empathize with that feel. I really struggled a lot with that feeling like I should be teaching all the
Yeah.
time,
It's
or
a case of the shouldas.
yeah.
A couple other comments here. GFan says she appreciates the idea about the little book. Um, she says, often it's hard for my kid. Oh, yeah. She says, I've witnessed that with my boys. My little one is so confident with letters and sounds because he's been observing his older brother working hard with
Oh,
his phonetic work. Awesome.
beautiful.
She also adds, it's hard for my kids to get back into the routines.
Hmm.
Maybe it's just me. No, it's not just you. And then she adds, someone told me, what are you doing teaching the cursive writing? They need to learn keyboard.
That's hilarious. We
Yeah.
could do a whole episode about that too. Maybe we will.
And one other, Caitlin adds, 18-month-old always wants to be involved in 4-year-old brother's work lessons.
Yep.
Yep. Tale
I
as old
know.
as
And
time.
you're even talking about an even younger, my youngest example was 3 in this episode. But yeah, an 18-monther, what are they going to get out of some of these activities? You don't know. It could be a lot more than you think.
Okay, so we had talked about the planes of development. We've talked about the spiral curriculum in that example of how you can use the same concept and sort of you're going to get deeper and deeper. And because of the planes of development, because of the individual needs of the children, they're going to get different things out of it. And if you're structuring your homeschool to take advantage of that, you're really going to enjoy the process much more than trying to segment them so uh, specifically like you might see in a traditional school. Okay, our third concept though is learning together. So both observation and teaching are essential parts of the Montessori approach. So you are presenting a lesson, you're not spending very much time on it, just a few minutes at most, depending on the age of the child, it might even be less. And then you're letting them explore the concept and observing what you're seeing. So in this process, you're going to give both children or all 3 children, however many you have, an opportunity to learn and grow. And you're going to be observing how they're each interacting with the lesson that you've given them, right? So what you're going to find is that older children are going to take on a leadership role, especially kids in the second plane. They're coming into this moral age and they want to sort of just they have a real sense of right and wrong. This is when you get into a lot of superhero worship or other things like that in the second plane. And so that sense of like being in charge or being the leader often is very appealing to a child at that age. And they're going to be reinforcing their learning. So what we just heard from GFAM is this example, right? So they're setting an example, they're reinforcing what learning looks like with the younger one, and they're kind of embodying often a leadership role, and that can be very inspiring. So, Caitlin, your 18-month-old wants to be involved with the 4-year-old. It's hard to imagine, right? An 18-month-old, they're so little, but they are enamored with their big brother or sister. They just want to do whatever because they see, they idealize it. This is just the natural way of life.
Yeah.
When we have a multi-age classroom and a mindset that matches to it, you allow that. So even though your 4-year-old is not quite in that, she's not in the second plane, not thinking of that leadership role, that dynamic is already there. And it's a very powerful tool to help build cohesion within the family, to help them have a healthier relationship with one another, to lean into the natural developmental skills that are present in a child. This is a power of the multi-age classroom. And when we homeschool, the classroom is our home. We don't have to do anything other than embrace it.
Um, okay, so that's really helpful, I think, to a whole lot of families. But I want to just give a little shout out. I know this is all about siblings, but there are some of our members who are watching, maybe, who don't have a sibling at home.
Oh,
And what happens here? We've got just given you 3 reasons why the Montessori method is all set up for multi-age learning. Oh no, I've only got one little 5-year-old. What do I do? Is my child missing out on all this, the whole spiral
yeah, I'm looking
curriculum
at them.
and learning together and all these benefits? Of course not. Your child is treating you as part of that multi-age environment. And I think this is something that's totally foreign to traditional education, so we don't even consider it. But as your child grows and develops, they are looking to you to represent the older learner
Mm-hmm.
who is going to teach them things, and they're going to start teaching things to you as well.
That's right.
So if you have an older child and a younger child, they're going to have a special dynamic that really is unique and special. But all children seek these opportunities to interact in a multi-age way with other people. And so your child is going to be learning these skills when they're at the playground. They're going to be learning these skills with grandma, they're going to, or grandpa, or aunts and uncles, cousins.
Cousins,
They're going to
whoever.
be learning it with you in your own home. And I know that sounds silly that you're both the younger sibling and the older sibling in mindset, but you are like, and it is, it works really, really well too. You're going to model for your child. You're going to observe your child. They're going to teach you things that you maybe you already know how to do, but they're going to need to practice that skill to like have that kind of leadership role. And it's going to be with you.
Yeah.
So don't feel like you're left out of this. It's all the benefits are there, even if you just have one at home.